That's good. We'll try that. Okay. Continuing the conversation.
Yeah. So as me and Andy were talking about, for some reason we just decided that we would record this because we thought it was a really cool conversation. But we were talking about like the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis.
Yeah. So explain the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis so that people can understand what we're talking about.
It's the idea that the language you speak and its grammatical structure and various other aspects of the language determine how like you think about the world. And we were talking about an experiment where they took people, they sat them down, and they had the people watch a video of a man sitting in a chair. And then they asked the people what they saw in the video, and they found that some languages, the people were much more likely to assign blame. So like people who spoke Germanic languages were much more likely to assign blame, to say the man broke the chair instead of just saying like the chair broke, you know?
Mm-hmm. And
so we spun off from that, where Andy mentioned, what was it you called it?
What?
The E prime?
Oh, E prime, yeah. Yeah, so E prime is like this attempt at speaking English where you eliminate the word is from your vocabulary. And I first heard this from this guy named Robert Anton Wilson. And he got it from this dude named Korzybski, who wrote this. He wrote about what he called general semantics. I don't know if you've heard about this. You said you've heard about E prime. But if you eliminate is, so if I want to say that platform is blue, I would just say that platform blue without an is there. And like the idea is that it changes the way that you think about the world. So if I say something is a certain way, I'm asserting certainty.
Yeah.
Right? And if I take is out, then what I'm now asserting is my perception. Right?
Oh, okay.
So
you're saying that's how it changes the orientation of your consciousness?
Yes. Yeah. So if I'm just saying that platform blue, hungry, instead of saying I am, like I think am might be another thing that you take out. I'm not sure about that. But you just say I experience hunger.
Yeah.
Right? So now you're focusing on the way that you feel, the experience, what McKenna calls, and this
instead of assigning being to it.
Yeah, you're assigning your direct felt experience.
Yeah.
And you're
as opposed to something being like inherent in the object that you're perceiving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a more agnostic way of thinking.
Yeah.
You're thinking agnostically whenever you speak this way. Or at least it lends itself to more agnostic thinking. And so like that's kind of a demonstration of this what'd you call it? The Whorf hypothesis.
Sapir-Whorf hypothesis being found in the E prime.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the other thing about that I find like really fascinating is that of course I'm no expert on Heidegger. I think he was kind of like a reactionary piece of crap, don't get me wrong. But like a lot of, not all of it, it's not like the core of reactionary thinking, you know, but like a lot of reactionary philosophy tends to like essentialize and kind of like assign static qualities, and is really obsessed with like the being of an object.
Yeah.
You know, like its core being, like it's got to have a core to it.
Yeah.
And so the thing is that Heidegger, when he was writing, he was obsessed with this question of being. And a way to kind of like linguistically think about that, even Heidegger himself used, is he would ask like, what is? What does it mean when we say that something is, you know, X, Y,
It's like the polar opposite of E prime.
Yeah, and so like, I guess if we're talking about the way that like language orients your consciousness, I mean, I don't want to get like too like postmodern Deleuzian or anything, but like it might be kind of funny if we could like turn back the clock and like go into God mode, you know, and like run an experiment on all of humanity where we just erase the word is from all these languages.
Yeah.
And see if that leads via Sapir-Whorf to maybe not totally eliminating it, but making fascism less of a force. You know?
If we just got rid of is.
If we just get rid of it.
And the certainty of asserting something's being.
Yeah, the certainty of asserting something's being would obviously would never totally get rid of it, because not only is fascism undergirded by culture and like libidinal economy, but also like fascism is undergirded by material economy. You know, like that's part of it too, obviously. So it wouldn't totally eliminate it, but like would it make it less bad? Would it slow the spread of fascism?
Okay, I have like a rough conception of like the basic drive behind fascism, and you tell me what you think about this. Like, there's one drive, like fascism is a kind of reaction to problems or perceived problems, and it's a reaction against an external cause.
See, but I think, okay, I'm gonna disagree, obviously respectfully, because we're respectful fucking like mature adults here. I feel like, so I'm not saying that I'm not saying that it's unimportant to fight against fascist ideology, because fascist ideology is what is used to get the populace to accept things that are not in their material interests.
Okay.
But the ideology itself is not like the true dynamic of fascism. And I think the true dynamic of fascism is actually like a lot simpler than what most of these philosophers have been getting at. And like I feel like I had this revelation about the true dynamics of fascism when reading about the Japanese fascists in the decades leading up to like World War II. So like the thing about the Japanese people in the decades leading up to World War II is that their nation actually did have a democracy, right? And most people don't know that, because it didn't last that long before the fascists took over. And so the material undergirding, this material dynamic that led to the rise of fascism in Japan, is that when democracy came to Japan, it caused these formally feudal lords to fall into poverty, as well as a lot of samurai families.
Yeah, because the wealth got voted away, right?
Yeah, basically. And so the reactionary dynamic here is that they were reacting in a way to try to regain that unjust material advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Now, part of their ideology was that Western influence had tainted Japan. But the funny thing is that a lot of these military officers who come from the former samurai families that went to the military to escape poverty and then became the officers that could foment the coup against Japanese democracy.
Okay.
A lot of these officers studied in Germany, and they picked up Ludendorff's Total War, which is a fascist ideology that was circulating in Germany even before Hitler rose to power. And so the thing is that if they're really concerned about Western influence, why the fuck would you take your ideology from a fucking German guy when you went to Germany, right? Well, there's a typical like fascist inconsistency there, but also like the reason why the ideology has the inconsistency is because it's not about the fucking ideology. It's about regaining that material advantage, right? Even if they themselves buy into their own ideology, the real motivating factor is regaining the material advantage. And so I'm not saying it's unimportant to fight against the ideology amongst the masses, because you have to fight against it to make them to understand that their material interests don't lie with fascism. And the fascists can't do anything if they don't have large groups of people, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like buying into the ideology is more or less like a misapprehension of the true dynamic under the surface.
Well, ideology is a product of material circumstance.
That is true too, yeah.
So if we're saying, well, the material circumstance is primary, well, of course it would be.
Yeah.
For there to be an ideology, But the thing is, like, if it wasn't, but these reactionaries, if it wasn't Ludendorff's Total War, they would have picked up some other justification. Well, the point is that ultimately whenever I was talking earlier about like it's looking at this, it's externalizing the problematic, right? Like it's an enemy from without, or if the enemy is within us, it came from outside of us.
The Western influence.
Yeah, it's the parasitic language, right? Yeah. Like the point is that I don't want to change.
Yeah.
I want to maintain my privilege, right? And like I'm just looking for a justification for that. And so, like, the material basis is you're privileged, you have an unfair advantage, you have some kind of, like, you're in some dominator society, and you're on top, and you want to stay there.
Yeah.
And so, like, the details of the ideology are unimportant, but what I'm saying is that you're going to find a core among all of these.
Oh, you're talking about there's going to be similarities amongst the ideology, even if it isn't the true material dynamic undergirding the ideology.
Yeah, because if you're in a dominator society, and you're looking for a justification to stay there, you're either going to be like, it's their fault over there across the sea, or if you can't really come up with that, the people here that are causing it are external to us, right? They're not the real us, because you don't want to change. You don't want yourself to be the cause of the problem. Because if that was the case, that might mean that you have to question your society.
Yeah.
And so that's what I was getting at, is that okay, obviously chicken and egg, like, this is the latter thing that comes.
Yeah.
Right? This comes after the material circumstance. It didn't produce the material circumstance. But this is kind of the structure of that justification. Yeah. Is that you're never going to blame yourself.
Yeah.
Because you are the best, you know. You're king so and so of the shit mound.
I also feel like the dynamic between, like, the cross pollination between the Japanese and the German fascists in, like, the decades leading up to World War II, that kind of, like, cross pollination dynamic. Like, I was also reading about that kind of history, and it kind of like I know this is kind of like away from the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, but I feel like it's good to follow conversations wherever they go. But that also, like, highlights the dynamic of what's wrong with settlers in such a clarifying way. Because the thing is that if you buy into this kind of, and, like, I don't want to, like, say, like, rad-lib, but this kind of, like, rad-lib thesis that that the influence of European fascist bad thought was what really motivated the Japanese fascists, then ironically, in a weird twist, you're accepting the Japanese fascist logic that Western influence corrupted it.
Yeah, you're accepting the premise that they used to justify their own fascism.
Yeah, exactly. You really are if you're going to be that kind of, like, rad-lib kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, where it's not material circumstances, it's bad ideology.
Yeah.
That's a real issue, and it's those damn Westerners kind of thing. And I feel like the value in settlers, I feel like there is a value in settlers in that it says, okay, well, there is this material reality that underneath white supremacy that was popular in America and still is to a large degree, that the white working class were bribed away from class consciousness. I think that's 100% true.
I think that's just a historical function of whiteness in general.
Yeah, but the other thing about it that bothers me about settlers is that not only do they essentialize this into the white working class, but in addition to, like, essentializing it, it's also like, yeah, I agree with you, J.Sakai, like, that's the issue with what's going on. But J.Sakai, the whole point of being a socialist is to speak with the people and then wipe away all of this ideology that keeps them from realizing their true interests, you know? And J.Sakai seems to be a very big pessimist for that project.
Yeah.
You know, and then you have to ask J.Sakai, like, if you're such a big pessimist as for the possibility of class consciousness arising in the portion of the working class that is white, then your whole project is kind of just fucked from the beginning, J.Sakai.
Well, know
what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying about that?
Let's go back to the feudalists that became fascists, right? Because it's not the same. It's not a one-to-one comparison. There's no real comparison ever is, right? You know, we don't say that electricity is like water because it's exactly like water. We say it's similar.
Because it has similar, like, flows.
So, like, but there's a similarity in that the feudalists had a position of privilege, and they wanted a justification for it, and white people, right, were being given a position of privilege, were kind of making their own position of privilege. It was like both were happening at the same time. But, like, point is, they wanted to maintain it, and they came up with a reason for it. And can we be as pessimistic? Is it a matter of degree compared to the feudalists with the white people? I mean, like, I think ultimately we can reduce something down to a matter of principle here and say, like, when someone is in a position of privilege, their tendency, we could take like a soft standpoint position here and say they're not inclined to question their own privilege, right? And if you want to make them more inclined, you can't just ideologically say, oh, it would be better, if the world was all, hunky-dory and we loved and kissed each other, Like, you got to actually be like, here's how we could do something better than what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Not just by saying it, but by showing it.
Yeah, and also showing them, like, this is also better for you.
Yeah. And so, like, what is the materially better thing that you could do? And I think that, like, there was some of this stuff back in the day whenever settlers were coming in, because there were defects.
Yeah, there were.
Right? There were people who were just joining native people and indigenous people, like, this is where I would rather be.
Yeah.
Right? And some of that came down to a matter of force.
You're talking about defectors, right?
Yeah, like white people who basically had whiteness and were being born into whiteness, traveling into whiteness, whatever, and were kind of rejecting it and joining indigenous people. And so there's something the indigenous people were offering that was better for them to do that, right? And you could question, like, were these marginalized white people, or were they just white people who saw something better and went to that?
Yeah.
And, like, but the problem is that, like, in that situation, whatever the case, you did have convincing white people, like, hey, this is a better thing, but you didn't have the force because they didn't have guns, or as many guns. You didn't have empire behind them, all that kind of shit.
Yeah.
So you have to not only provide this material advantage, you also back it up with force.
Yeah.
And that's another element to this. But, like, going back, like, I wanted to go back to the feudalist people and compare it to the white people. Like, could you have given them something better?
Yeah. See, and that's the thing. And, like, the question then becomes, because the old feudal lords and the former samurai families, after the rise of democracy in Japan, like, it's really true that they really fell into poverty. And then the question becomes, like, okay, like, yeah, fuck them, they're feudal lords. Like, I agree with that. Like, yeah, they did a lot of shitty stuff. But the thing is also that
keep going.
If maybe you didn't allow them to fall so fucking hard, would that have prevented the reaction,
Yeah.
That's the real question.
Hold on, he's in the restroom.
Oh yeah, sorry y'all. We're taking a piss break right now. So Andy will be back. So if you hear some chicken frying in some oil, that's not chicken. That's Andy's piss. And like a good.
Well, okay. So repeat your question. I'm sorry.
So, like, I guess, like, a really fun question to get into in, like, historical what ifs is that if Japanese democracy had been more, I don't want to say socialist because that's asking for a large leap, but if it had been more social democratic with programs that would have kept these formal feudal families and these former samurai families from falling to such extreme poverty, would their reaction have been as bad?
Okay, so in order that...
Because we're talking about the material benefits you can offer to people to keep them from falling to reactionary type ways, right?
Yeah. So whenever Marx talks about, like, quote unquote so-called primitive communism and, like, how, like, how he thinks you have to advance through feudalism, and there's, like, this march through history, and, like, capitalism lays the foundation for socialism, and you can't get to really post-capitalist kind of socialism unless you go through capitalism. Like, part of what's being talked about, and, like, part of what I think is, like, is it the case that we're just going to drop the ball necessarily, or we're going to stochastically drop the ball unless we do that? So, like, to unpack what I'm saying is, like, is it the case, like, are we just materially unable to become socialists unless we go through capitalism, right?
Yeah. And then you get to the...
Or are we just unlikely?
Or just unlikely, yeah.
That's the because, like, if we're just unlikely, that means that, like, part of the struggle for socialism is a matter of us just happening to fail.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, I guess, kind of like, is it determined or not is kind of the question. And it doesn't have to be absolutely determined for it to be necessary.
Yeah.
Right? Because we don't have to be prophesizing.
Yeah.
Right? To be like, well, there's just no practical way.
Yeah.
Right? So like if you're moving, like if you're struggling against people and they have consciousness, and their consciousness is molded by their material conditions, and someone's material conditions and the consciousness that comes out of that is going to dictate, is it going to dictate what they can do, or is it going to influence what they can do? Right? And if it does dictate it, are there ways to influence it? It's like, think about like paths, right? Like maybe a feudal person is going to have few paths that you can interact with them to make them
have fewer reactionary tendencies.
Yeah. Maybe they're going to have fewer paths, or maybe they're going to have no paths. And maybe you have to go through capitalism. Like, what do you think is going on there? Like, obviously, I think human beings are malleable. And I think that, like, depending on your experiences, you can change.
Yeah.
And you just have to be subjected to the right experiences, right?
Yeah.
And it's not a matter, but I don't think that it's like a matter of like an intelligentsia or like some technocrat that can like.
Yeah, I don't think it is either.
I think that it's a collective thing.
I think we've seen like technocratic modes of managing things fail miserably. So I agree with you that I don't think it will ever be technocratic. But yet again, going back to one of your favorite ass concepts, I know since you don't deny it, Andy, you love this. Like I guess we really are kind of talking about, if we're not talking about technocratic, and we're also not talking about like a laissez-faire mode of just letting the chips fall where they may, I guess we are kind of talking like about prefigurative politics.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, like
I do love me some prefiguration.
I love it so much. I don't think I love it as much as you do, Andy. I think if prefigurative politics was like a person, you would like suck their dick, probably. You know, like
yeah.
You go sloppy on prefigurative
I'd
politics.
suck whatever genitals they wanted to present to me. I'm not sticky.
Oh God.
Or non-genitals, as long as it was just a loving part of their body extended. Anyway.
Now we're getting into alien sexuality. Like sexuality of species that we haven't even met yet.
Yeah, we can't.
In the far-flung future where we have luxury. Like the thing is, see,
we should stop being the horny left right now, okay?
No. I gotta get this thought out. This is what. No, I'm going to cancel culture time. Luxury, fully automated luxury gay space communism is now canceled because gay only exists within human culture due to our specific gendered configurations.
Oh, you're gonna get the gay pan flame started.
But the issue with this, though, is that it excludes forms of alien sexuality from our revolution, and because it excludes them,
gay is inclusive, or gay and bi, they're inclusive. Okay,
okay.
Like they're inclusive. I allegedly, I don't know the details of this debate. It's very heated. Some people get very heated about this debate, but it's there. I don't know. Look.
So hey folks, welcome to the Poseidon struggle session. You know?
Oh God. I didn't think about this before. Maybe it's obvious to other people, but someone characterized Posada's what was pathological about him, like really well, is that he always took the worst situation and just found a way to make it optimistic.
Yeah.
So like whenever the reason aliens was a thing with him is because like back then like the Roswell alien conspiracy that was like
always
big.
had the worst possible view of it.
Yeah, and then people were like, oh, War of the Worlds and everything, and he's like, communism is inevitable, so like how is it a good thing? Actually, the aliens are our comrades and they're going to liberate us. That's really just the whole thought process. It's just like, what if bad thing good? What if nuclear war is good, actually? Yeah. And like it leads us to communism. He was like the ultimate optimist. Like everything was just optimistic about him. Like the fucking pit of the hell could open up, crack through the ground, and Satan could leap out, and he'd be like, "Hey, comrades, Satan, thanks for bringing us to the revolution." I don't know.
So let's retrace this conversation. We went from the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis to talking about E prime, like an E prime form of grammar into talking about
Fascism.
fascism
And abolishing is.
And abolishing is.
And then we eventually arrived at prefiguration.
We eventually arrived at prefiguration, but we took a detour through Ludendorff's total war and his influence on the Japanese fascists.
Yeah, so that's how we arrived there, because I asked the question.
And J.Sakai.
Yeah, I asked the question about influencing these feudalists. And so like that's how we get to prefiguration. So the question is like in our material conditions, whenever we're talking about revolution, and we're talking about maybe this is a bit language related, like what do you say to people? How do you communicate to people? Like we're talking about communication, and like can you communicate through example? Is that part of your communication? Do you need to do something to show them through example? Whether that's by putting them in the situation or just demonstrating it in your own behavior, right? Or is language actually useful, and can we actually talk to people? You know?
Well, I mean,
I more and more feel like it's difficult to use language to convince anyone of anything.
Yeah, you have to give them like, because the thing is that if you don't materially provide anything to anyone, why the fuck would they listen to you, right? I feel like that's like the number one flaw of that's like one of the biggest flaws of online communication, especially in terms of like online political communication. It's not that it's totally pointless. There are some people, and they're worth converting. There are some people out there, and I've used myself as an example, that can be converted from ideology to ideology with a serious consideration of each ideology. But most people, you're just some random asshole on Facebook. Like, why should they listen to you? You've never been there in their lives. You've never been there for them.
It's very alienated.
Yeah, it's very alienated. And once you've got that gap of alienation, communicating anything or any type of way to improve their lives basically becomes like impossible.
That's why I
mean, that's why we do the food. That's why we do the food relief with the DSA.
I do find some success with Rogerian arguments because it creates camaraderie. It creates same teamness, right? If you find something that you can agree with them on, and you state it first, that disarms them. They're actually listening to you.
Yeah.
Right? And then you're describing your agreement, and you put your criticism of them in there, and then on the other side of it,
within the bounds of the agreement of shared values.
Yeah, you share values.
We share values, but I feel like these values are better expressed underneath this form of social organization, maybe than the one that you mistakenly think is a better form of social
organization. And then it's important to repeat that you appreciate that you share the value. Yeah. Because you put them in a comfort sandwich, and now like they're not only they actually listen to you because they think that you are already on their side, even though they might be a fucking conservative, you know, and you're like I'm a gay, you know, socialist, whatever, you know, like now they're like actually listening. They paid attention to what you said. They even think that it's that what you're saying is what they're saying. Right, that what you're saying is what you're fighting the same fight, right? And then like you finish it off like, yeah, I've criticized you, but remember we're on the same team. You know, I appreciate your values. So now like they can't even really like get mad at you, you know, unless they just want to fucking go full on and become like some kind of fucking reactionary or something, and actually have different values, right? So like. A way that this could play out in practice is maybe I'm making an argument against trickle down. Well, I don't just argue against trickle down. I point out that every developed nation, including ours, including Donald Trump, has backed, in this point of crisis, giving direct payments. Yeah. Because they know that that's the only way to save the economy. Now, whenever it comes to the economy actually being destroyed, why is it that they did that?
As opposed to trickle down.
Their behavior reflects
the opposite of trickle down.
Yeah, and so it's obvious they don't believe it. Yeah. And so if they don't believe it, all the powerful people in the world don't actually believe it when it comes down to like, oh shit, we better do something for real. We better actually save the economy, because if not, we're not going to have one, and we're not going to be able to reap the benefits of this. So you point it out in that way, like, hey, I'm not asserting trickle down's wrong. I'm not coming at you doing that. I'm pointing out that all the people that you've elected, whether you're a fucking regular ass neocon or a Trumpist or a fucking shit lib, you know,
Yeah.
Bidenite, you know, like, doesn't matter where you fall.
Yeah.
Everyone agrees that trickle down is wrong.
Yeah.
Everyone has demonstrated it. And
They
every
demonstrated
single
their actions.
Yeah, and every
Actions.
nation in the world,
Yeah.
you know, and the ones that don't, they're suffering. And we
Yeah.
have data to prove that.
Yeah.
Right? So like it's not me asserting this, right? And so like what do I want? So you start this conversation, I want us to have an economy. I want people to be able to go to work, right? But you know, I don't really want people to be able to go to work. I don't want people to have to work, you know, really. But like in the short term I do, right?
Yeah.
In the short term I don't want everyone to lose their job. And so in the short term I can say that.
Yeah.
So in order for me to like want these things, we have to do the opposite of trickle down.
Yeah.
We have to do UBI or something. I know there's problems with UBI, but like we have to give people money. We have to put money in the hands of regular citizens.
Yeah. And you're saying that even though we've gone a while on that, like that Rodegarian, that's an example of like the Rodegarian like argument working to try and convert. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the reason I brought this up is because I'm like severely pessimistic about talking to people with mouth words to convince them of things.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm much more inclined to think that by doing things you convince
Yeah.
people of things.
Which goes back to which loops back around to the idea of like materially being in somebody's life to try to convince them, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like.
And so like, remember we were talking about Bookchin before this conversation.
Yeah.
He was a big advocate of face-to-face democracy.
Yeah.
And he thought that it was a necessary but insufficient aspect of fighting for socialism, is that you had to have face-to-face assemblies.
Yeah.
And you had to bring back like town meetings and community
town
meetings.
hall meetings.
Yeah, stuff like that.
Actual town hall meetings.
Where people saw each other, you know, and you literally see the person who, whether it's like you're fighting a shared struggle or you're like, if you're an elected representative, you need to see the people that you represent, you know,
So I guess I want to say at the very end of this conversation, the practical output of all this is that if you want to convert people towards socialism away from fascism, you got to have more face-to-face conversations in that Rogerian style over connection over shared values. You have to materially be there in their lives, like and whatnot. And that's like the I don't want to say trifecta because there's not a third one that's come to my head right now, but that's like the epitome of a good strategy to convert people over to socialism.
Yeah,
you know?
we've been going for 33 minutes. Do you want to make this like an hour?
I think we're good here.
You're good? Because I could keep going. Like, there's all kinds of stuff I could bring up. We could do another episode. We could immediately follow this with another episode. How about that?
Y'all are seeing how the sausage is made. we're having a planning conversation for like the next episode on our impromptu, off-the-cuff inaugural podcast.
Well, we'll just say this is the end of the first hypothetical half, at least, of the first episode, and maybe there'll be a second half. We'll call the second episode the second half, and we'll just call all of our episodes halves. I don't know.
But don't worry, folks. I guarantee you, we'll have more moments in these conversations where we talk about the interaction of shit like alien and human sexuality and what that means for new arising social forms.
And you'll
in the near post-status future.
And y'all are gonna come to learn that even though Sean is more well-read than me, he's also more grimy and dirty than me, and I'm gonna keep us focused, even though I'm the dumb one.
No, there's no such thing as focus. It's a fucking lie. Okay, I cut it right there.
Okay, that's the cut. You want to keep recording and just record a second one and edit it, or you just want to hit that?
I think.